When my only son laughed and told me to get a job at 58, he thought he was mocking a helpless old widow. He forgot that the empire he ruled was built on land I still owned. So I did exactly what he asked. I went to work, erasing his entire existence from my ledger. By the time he woke up, I was gone, and he was worth absolutely nothing. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I am 58 years old, and until tonight, I believed that a mother's love was an endless well that could never run dry. I was wrong. I sat stiffly at the edge of a velvet-covered table in the center of the Gilded Lily, the most exclusive restaurant in Riverton, surrounded by the clinking of crystal and the hollow laughter of people who valued net worth over character. It was my granddaughter, Sophie's 10th birthday, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted duck, a scent so rich it made me nauseous. I looked down at my hands. They were calloused and rough, a stark contrast to the manicured fingers of the women around me. I wore my best grey wool suit, but I knew it looked dated. It was the same suit I had worn to board meetings 10 years ago when I still ran Hayes Construction, back before I stepped down to let my son, Russell, take the helm. Now, Russell sat at the head of the table, his silk tie catching the light, laughing loudly at a joke I did not understand. He looked polished, powerful, and utterly unfamiliar. To him, I was no longer the woman who built his empire from a single truck and a shovel. I was just a relic, a stain on his perfectly curated image. I reached into my purse and touched the worn edges of a manila envelope. Inside was the deed to a small plot of land by the lake, a piece of property I had purchased 20 years ago with the first real profit I ever made. It was not developed, but it was beautiful, and I wanted Sophie to have something that was real, something that would last. "Russell," I said, my voice quiet against the din of the party. "I have a gift for Sophie." Russell turned his head slowly, his eyes scanning me with a look of barely concealed irritation. He snatched the envelope from my hand before I could pass it to the child. He ripped it open, glanced at the document, and then let out a sharp, cruel laugh that silenced the nearby guests. "Land," Russell sneered, dangling the deed like a piece of trash. "You bought her a swamp." "Mom, God. This is pathetic. We are celebrating a milestone, and you bring us dirt. It is not just dirt." I tried to explain, keeping my voice steady despite the heat rising in my cheeks. "It is an investment. I bought it 20 years ago when nobody cares what you did 20 years ago," Russell shouted, throwing the deed onto the table where it landed in a plate of half-eaten appetizers. The room went dead silent. Even the waiters froze. Valerie, my daughter-in-law, swirled her wine and sighed loudly, not even looking at me. "Russell. She is making a scene," Valerie muttered, looking at her fingernails. "It is embarrassing." Russell leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "Valerie is right. Look at you. You sit here in that cheap suit, looking like a charity case. If you are so bored that you have to dig up old scraps of paper to feel useful, then do us all a favor. You are old, Mom, but you are not dead yet. Go get a real job at your age and stop pretending you still matter in this family." The guests chuckled nervously. The sound was like glass shattering in my ears. I looked at Russell, really looked at him, and realized that the boy I had raised was dead. In his place sat a monster who thought money made him a king. He had forgotten the most important detail of his reign. He thought the crown on his head was welded there, unaware that I still held the key to the vault. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply picked up my purse. "Enjoy your evening." "Russell," I said. As I walked away, I heard him booming behind me, his voice full of arrogance. "Let her go. She needs to learn her place. Everything in this family is mine anyway. I built this life." He was wrong. He built nothing. He merely stood on the foundation I poured. And he had no idea that the paperwork for that foundation was not in the company's safe, but in a wooden box under my bed. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the restaurant and stepped out into the night. The wind was biting, but I did not feel the cold. My face, usually soft with maternal worry, had hardened into stone. I was done being a mother. It was time to be a businesswoman again. The taxi dropped me off at the service entrance of the Hayes estate, a sprawling 10-acre compound that I had purchased 30 years ago. Back then, it was a symbol of my success. Now, as I walked down the gravel path toward the guest cottage, it felt like a prison. Russell did not allow me to stay in the main house anymore. He claimed it was because Valerie needed her privacy, but I knew the truth. I was an eyesore to them, a reminder of a past they wanted to scrub clean. I unlocked the door to the cottage. The air inside was heavy and smelled of mildew. The wallpaper in the hallway was peeling, revealing the damp rot underneath. And the heater had been broken for 3 months. I had asked Russell to fix it 4 times. Last week, he told me to put on an extra sweater. I shivered, but not from the cold. I shivered from the clarity that was finally washing over me. I did not take off my coat. Instead, I walked straight to the small, lumpy bed in the corner of the room. I got down on my knees, my joints protesting with a sharp ache, and reached deep underneath the frame. My fingers brushed against dust bunnies and cold floorboards until I felt the smooth, cool wood of the mahogany box. I pulled it out. It was heavy, locked, and exactly where I had left it. I wore the key around my neck, hidden beneath my blouse. I pulled the silver chain free and inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. Inside lay the truth that Russell had been too arrogant to ever question. He strutted around Riverton calling himself the CEO, the owner, the king of the Hayes Empire. But he never read the fine print. When I stepped down 10 years ago, I did not transfer ownership. I created a trust, a revocable living trust. Russell was merely the primary beneficiary with executive privileges, subject to my continued approval. He was a tenant in a house he thought he owned. I spread the documents out on the scarred wooden table. The deed of trust, the power of attorney revocation clauses, the asset liquidity forms. It was all there. I called it the uproot protocol. I had hoped I would never have to use it. I had prayed that my son would grow into a man of honor. Tonight, he proved that he was merely a boy with a credit card. I reached for my phone. It was past 11 o'clock at night, but I knew Bernard would answer. Bernard Doyle had been my lawyer since the days when I operated out of a garage. He was the only person in the world who hated Russell almost as much as I currently did. The phone rang twice. Eleanor Bernard's voice was rough with sleep, but alert. "Is everything all right?" "It is nearly midnight." "Bernard?" I said, my voice steady and devoid of the tremor that had been there only an hour ago. "Do you remember the clause of ingratitude we drafted in the original transfer agreement, the one regarding gross misconduct and public defamation of the grantor?" There was a silence on the other end. I could hear the rustle of sheets and the click of a bedside lamp turning on. "I remember," Bernard said, his voice dropping to a serious whisper. Eleanor, are you sure once we pull this trigger, there is no going back? It will strip him of everything, his accounts, his authority, even the title to the house he is sleeping in right now. I looked around the damp, miserable room my son had forced me to live in. I thought of the deed he had thrown into the appetizer plate. I thought of the laughter. He told me to get a job. Bernard, I said, looking at the papers. He told me I was useless. So, I am going back to work. I want you to execute the reversal. Tonight? Right now. Understood, Bernard said. I could hear the excitement in his voice now, the sharp intake of breath of a man ready for war. I will wake up the partners. We need to file the injunctions electronically before the banks open at 9 o'clock. By breakfast, he will be locked out. Transfer 70% of the liquid assets into the sovereign account we set up in Zurich. I commanded. Leave him with nothing but the debt on his personal credit cards. I want the company returned to my name, and I want the eviction notice prepared for the estate. It will be done, Bernard replied. Eleanor, I am sorry it came to this. Do not be, I said. Just get it done. I hung up the phone. The silence returned to the cottage, but it no longer felt oppressive. It felt like the calm before a beautiful storm. I walked over to the small, cracked mirror hanging by the door. The woman staring back at me looked tired. Yes, but the dullness in her eyes was gone. I wiped a smudge of dirt from my cheek. Russell wanted me to disappear. He wanted me to be invisible. Tomorrow morning, he would wish I was just a ghost. I straightened my collar and stared at my reflection. The mother was gone. The boss was back. The sun streamed through the sheer curtains of the master bedroom, promising a day of absolute victory. I stretched, feeling the lingering buzz of the expensive scotch from last night. Today was the day I was scheduled to close the Peterson deal, a massive acquisition worth $2 million that would finally silence the board members who whispered that I was nothing more than a nepotism hire. I reached for my tablet on the nightstand, intending to authorize the initial transfer of funds to secure the contract. I logged into the corporate account with a smug smile. The screen loaded. My heart stopped beating. Balance 0. I blinked, certain that I was still drunk or dreaming. I refreshed the page. Balance 0. This has to be a glitch, I muttered, my fingers trembling as I tapped the screen harder, as if force could make the numbers reappear. I switched to my personal savings account. 0. My checking account. 0. Even the emergency fund I kept for Valerie's impulse buys was empty. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced my chest. I tried to transfer $500 from my platinum credit card to my debit card just to see if the system was down. Transaction declined. Account frozen. What is going on? I yelled, throwing the covers off and standing up on shaky legs. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on the bedside table. It was not a call. It was a notification from the company's internal server, marked with the highest priority level. I opened it. The header was standard, but the words below it were a death sentence. Effective immediately. Russell Hayes is removed from the position of CEO due to gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary trust. All executive powers are hereby reverted to the founder and chairwoman, Eleanor Hayes. I stared at the name. Eleanor, my mother. The woman I had laughed at 12 hours ago. The woman I told to get a job. Russell. Valerie burst into the room, her face pale, holding her phone like it was a live grenade. My cards. They are all declining. I tried to order the catering for the brunch next week, and the vendor said the account does not exist. Fix this. You said we had plenty of money. Shut up, Valerie, I snapped, my mind racing as I scrambled to dial Bernard, our family attorney. Or rather, my attorney. Or so I thought. The line rang once. Then it went straight to voicemail. I dialed the CFO. Voicemail. I dialed my executive assistant, a woman who usually trembled at the sound of my voice. I cannot talk to you. Russell, she whispered hurriedly when she finally picked up. Mr. Doyle is here. He says you do not work here anymore. He says security has your picture at the front desk. I am the CEO, I screamed into the phone, clutching it so hard my knuckles turned white. You tell Doyle I will fire him. I will sue him for everything he has. You cannot, she said, her voice shaking with fear. The memo says. It says you never owned the controlling shares. It was a revocable trust. Eleanor revoked it this morning at 4 o'clock. Everything is gone. Russell, the stocks, the land holdings, the liquidity. It is all back in her name. She hung up. I stood there, frozen in the middle of the room. A notification popped up on my screen. It was an email from Bernard Doyle himself. Subject notice of vacancy. Mr. Hayes, per the instruction of the owner. Eleanor Hayes, you are required to vacate the premises of the Riverton estate by noon today. Please surrender the keys to the company Porsche and the penthouse office immediately. Failure to comply will result in law enforcement intervention. I felt like the floor was dissolving beneath me. The mansion I stood in, the car in the driveway, the Italian suit on the chair. None of it was mine. It never had been. I was a child playing dress-up in his mother's clothes, and she had decided that playtime was over. Russell Valerie's voice was high and shrill, cutting through the ringing in my ears. Why are you just standing there? Do something. We cannot have $0. We have bills. We have the club membership fees due tomorrow. I do not know what to do, I whispered, the realization crushing my lungs like a vice. She took it. She took it all. Who? Valerie shrieked. Your mother? That old woman. You said she was senile. You said she was harmless. The rage boiled up inside me, hot and blinding. I looked at the device in my hand, the portal to a life that had just been deleted. She isn't harmless, I roared, my voice breaking. She is. She is ruining me. I hurled the phone across the room with every ounce of strength I had left. It hit the marble fireplace and shattered into a dozen pieces, the black screen cracking just like my life. I fell to my knees, gasping for air, while Valerie screamed in the background. My mother had not just fired me. She had erased me. It is impossible, I muttered, pacing the length of the marble floor in the living room, my hands gripping the edges of my laptop until my knuckles turned white. She is not this smart. She barely knows how to attach a PDF to an email. Someone else is doing this. Someone is manipulating her. I was trying to breathe, but the air felt thin, as if the oxygen in the house had been repossessed along with my assets. I tried to rationalize the collapse of my life. My mother was a simple woman. She liked gardening. She liked baking cookies. She did not execute hostile takeovers before breakfast. Stop pacing. Russell, you are making me dizzy. Valerie snapped from the sofa. She was not crying. She was scrolling through her phone, likely checking which of her friends had seen the news already. You told me you handled the trust. You said she signed away her rights years ago. I thought she did, I yelled, spinning to face her. The paperwork was complex. I put it in front of her during Christmas dinner 5 years ago. She just signed it. She did not even read it. Well, clearly she read it better than you did, Valerie said, her voice dripping with venom. You are incompetent. Russell. A fraud. And now you have dragged me into the mud with you. Before I could scream back, my laptop pinged. Then it pinged again. And again. A cascade of notifications flooded the screen. I froze as I read the subject lines. They were not from the bank. They were from the private investors, the ones I had been skimming off the top for the last 3 years, to fund Valerie's jewelry habit and my gambling debts in Vegas. Mr. Hayes. We received the audit logs regarding the phantom construction sites. Russell. Why did your mother just send us proof of the altered invoices? My blood ran cold. She knew. She had known all along, every time I faked a report. Every time I moved money into an offshore shell company. She had been watching. She had not just taken the company back, she was systematically destroying my reputation. She was ensuring I would never work in this town again. I slammed the laptop shut and ran out the back door. I sprinted across the perfectly manicured lawn, my Italian leather shoes slipping on the wet grass, until I reached the guest cottage. I needed to find her. I needed to scream at her, to shake her, to force her to undo this insanity. I kicked the door open. Mother's silence greeted me. The small, damp room was empty. The bed was made, the sheets pulled tight. The closet door stood open, revealing nothing but bare wire hangers. The smell of mildew remained, but her scent lavender and old paper was fading. She was gone. I walked to the small wooden table in the center of the room. There was a single sheet of paper resting there, weighed down by the spare key to the cottage. I picked it up, my hands trembling so violently that the paper rattled. Russell, you told me that I was a burden. You told me that I needed to stop relying on the family and look after myself. I am doing exactly what you said. Do not look for me. Eleanor. No, I screamed. The sound tore from my throat, raw and animalistic. No, you cannot do this to me. You are my mother. You are supposed to fix things. I grabbed the lamp from the bedside table and hurled it against the wall. It shattered, sending ceramic shards flying across the room. I flipped the mattress. I tore the curtains from the rod. I destroyed the room just as she had destroyed my life. But it brought me no satisfaction. For the first time, I realized the terrifying truth. I had never controlled Eleanor Hayes. I had simply been allowed to exist in her shadow, and I had mistaken her patience for weakness. A shadow fell across the doorway. I turned, panting, sweat dripping down my forehead. Valerie stood there, her arms crossed, looking at the wreckage of the room with disdain. I checked the safe in the bedroom. She said coldly, "It is empty. You really have nothing left. Do you, Valerie? Please? I can fix this. I just need time." I pleaded, taking a step toward her. She held up a hand to stop me. I am not going to be the wife of a bankrupt criminal. Russell. I have an image to maintain. She looked at her watch. You have 48 hours to put $2 million back into our joint account. If the balance is still zero on Friday morning, I will file for divorce. And I will take the dog. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement, leaving me alone in the ruin of my mother's old life. 48 hours. I whispered to myself. I ran back to the main house, my mind fracturing. I sat down at my desk and pulled up the deep-level server access. The back doors I thought only I knew about. I typed in the command lines to trace the asset transfers, to find the digital trail of where the money had gone. Error 404. Path not found. I tried the backup servers. Data corrupted. I tried the cloud archives. Empty. I stared at the blinking cursor. It was as if the money had evaporated into thin air. Every link was dead. Every account was scrubbed. My mother had not just left. She had wiped the slate so clean that it was as if the Hayes fortune had never existed at all. I was hunting a ghost. I left Riverton while the streetlights were still humming against the bruised purple sky of the early morning. I was driving a nondescript beige sedan rented under the name of a high school friend who had passed away a decade ago. Russell would inevitably look for my old station wagon, but that vehicle was currently sitting in the long-term parking lot at the airport, a decoy for his stupidity to chase. I was already 2 counties away, moving like a shadow across the state line. I stopped in a small, sleepy town called Oakhaven. I pulled up to a self-storage facility where I had kept a unit for 15 years. Inside, hidden within a stack of old encyclopedias, was a fireproof pouch containing the original copies of every asset I owned. These were not the digital files Russell thought he could hack. These were ink and paper. The only things that truly mattered in a court of law. An hour later, I stood before the plot of land by the lake. This was the gift Russell had sneered at, the swamp he had thrown into a plate of appetizers. He was a fool. This 3-acre lot was not just dirt. It was the legal keystone of the entire Hayes family trust. In the fine print of the trust agreement, the existence of the trust itself was contingent upon the family retaining ownership of this specific founding plot. A grey car pulled up down the dirt road. Mr. Henderson, a quiet investor who had worked with Bernard for years, stepped out. He carried a briefcase. "It is a shame to lose such a view," Mr. Henderson said, looking out at the mist rising off the water. "Are you sure about this?" "Eleanor, the view was spoiled a long time ago," I replied. "Do you have the check?" He nodded and handed me a cashier's check for $5,000. It was a trivial amount, but the money did not matter. The signature mattered. I signed the deed, transferring the land out of the Hayes family name forever. The moment the pen lifted from the paper, the legal structure of Russell's inheritance collapsed. My burner phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Bernard. "Phase 2 is complete," Bernard said, his voice crackling slightly. "The sale has been recorded in the county database. Since the Keystone property is sold, the trust is automatically dissolved. Russell has lost his standing to file a grievance. He is screaming at the security guards at the main gate right now." "Let him scream," I said, watching Mr. Henderson drive away with the deed. "He needs the exercise." I walked over to a rusty oil drum used by campers for fires. I opened the fireproof pouch and took out the documents I no longer needed, the sentimental letters I had written to Russell when he was in college. The photos of his graduation, where he looked at me with genuine pride, and the copy of his birth certificate I had carried for years. I struck a match and dropped it into the drum. The flame caught the dry paper instantly. I watched my son's smiling face curl, blacken, and turn into ash. I felt lighter. I drove 3 towns over to a truck stop. I removed the SIM card from my phone and snapped it in half, dropping the pieces into a soda can in the trash. I left the beige sedan there with the keys in the tailpipe and walked around the back to a blue pickup truck I had purchased for cash 2 weeks ago. As I climbed into the cab, a memory flashed in my mind. It was 5 years ago. I was sitting in Russell's office, writing a check to cover a gambling debt that would have buried him. This is the last time. Russell. I had told him then, my voice trembling with a mother's fear. I am your mother, but do not make me your enemy. I built you up, and I can take you down. You wouldn't dare. He had laughed, kissing my cheek with condescension. You love me too much. He was right about the love. I did love him, but he forgot that a mother's job is to teach her child how to survive. And sometimes, the only lesson left is pain. The ache in my chest was gone. It was replaced by a cold, rhythmic beating of a heart that was finally mine again. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. I turned on the FM radio, letting the static settle into a low, thumping jazz tune. I shifted the truck into gear and pulled onto the highway, driving into the black mouth of the night. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, and the corners of my mouth curled up into a smile that no one, not even I, could quite decipher. I sat in the cramped, smoke-filled office of a private investigator named Vance, a man whose cheap suit smelled of stale tobacco and desperation. I had found him in the back of a phone book, the only one willing to take a case from a man whose credit cards were currently serving as paperweights. I needed to find Eleanor. I needed to beg, threaten, or manipulate her into giving my life back. Vance slid a thin folder across the scarred wooden desk. He did not look impressed. Your mother is a ghost. Mr. Hayes. Vance grunted, chewing on a toothpick. But even ghosts leave footprints if you know where to look. Did you know she has operated 6 different mobile numbers in the last 10 years? I stared at him, my mouth falling open. 6. That is impossible. She barely knows how to use an iPad. She asks me for help to reset her Netflix password every month. She was playing you, Vance said with a dry chuckle. Every one of those numbers was registered to a shell corporation. She has been communicating with lawyers, offshore bankers, and real estate brokers since before you even became CEO. She has been planning this exit strategy for a decade. I felt the blood drain from my face. 10 years. She had been smiling at me across the dinner table, listening to my bragging, all while silently building a trap door beneath my feet. I left the office feeling nauseous. When I returned to the estate, I found the front door wide open. Valerie was in the kitchen, frantically tapping on her laptop. Her face was a mask of sheer terror. Russell, she screamed when she saw me. Where is it? Where is the money I told you? It is gone, I said wearily, pouring myself a glass of tap water because the bottled water delivery had been cancelled. Not your money, she shrieked, throwing a vase at the wall. My money. The emergency fund I kept in the Cayman account. I tried to transfer it to my sister's account just now, and the bank said the account was flagged for liquidation by the primary trustee. I froze. Valerie. You listed Mom as the secondary trustee on that account for tax purposes. Didn't you? She told me it would save us 15%. Valerie sobbed, sinking to the floor. She took it. Russell. She took my getaway money. She knew I would try to leave you. My phone pinged. It was not a text. It was an anonymous email with no subject line. I opened it, my hands shaking. Want to find her. Start where she lost everything. The words hit me like a physical blow. 20 years ago. I was 22, fresh out of college and arrogant. I had bet the company's operating capital on a high-risk tech startup that turned out to be a Ponzi scheme to keep me out of prison and save the family name. Eleanor had sold our mansion and moved us into a run-down rental in a neighborhood called the Hollows. She had scrubbed floors and eaten canned soup for 3 years so I could rebuild. I grabbed my keys and ran to the car. The Hollows had not changed. It was still a grid of cracked pavement and overgrown yards. I pulled up to the small, peeling yellow house where we had lived during those dark years. The windows were boarded up, but the mailbox was stuffed full. I ripped the mailbox open. Most of it was junk, but at the very back, I found a single envelope. It was a utility bill for water and electricity. The service address was this house. The billing date was last month. She owns this place, I whispered to the empty street. Why would she keep this dump? My phone rang. It was Vance. Mr. Hayes, Vance said, his voice unusually low. I did some digging into those shell companies. I found something. The trail does not just go back 10 years. It goes back 40 years. Your mother is smarter than you thought. Hell, she's smarter than me. I am not sure you want to know the truth about where her initial capital came from. Tell me, I shouted, gripping the steering wheel. I am sending you a file, Vance said. But Russell, be careful. The woman you are chasing, I don't think she is the woman you call Mom. The line went dead. I sat in the dark car, clutching the utility bill from a house that represented my greatest failure. I looked at the dark windows of the yellow house, and for the first time in my life, I was not just angry at Eleanor Hayes, I was terrified of her. The address Vance gave me led to a town called Mapleton, a place so small and forgotten that it felt like driving into a sepia photograph. I remembered this place. We lived here for 2 years after my father died, before Eleanor built the construction empire. I pulled my car up to a small, dusty storefront with a sign that read, Hayes Archives. I did not even know she kept an office here. The lock was old, and a swift kick shattered the rotting wood of the doorframe. I stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old paper. I expected to find a few boxes of tax returns. Instead, I found a library of secrets. Floor-to-ceiling shelves were packed with binders. I pulled one down at random. It was a property deed for an apartment complex in Chicago. I pulled another, a commercial lot in Seattle. I frantically opened box after box, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Eleanor did not just own the house in Riverton. She owned real estate all over the country. She had built a kingdom right under my nose, and I had been too busy looking in the mirror to notice. I see you finally found the stash, a raspy voice said from the doorway. I spun around. An old man in overalls was leaning against the doorframe, chewing on a straw. I recognized him. Mr. Abernathy, our old neighbor from 30 years ago. Where is she? I demanded, though my voice lacked its usual bite. Gone, the old man said, spitting on the ground. She stopped by yesterday. She told me you would come. She said, my son thinks he is a king, but one day he will have to learn how to be a subject again. She knew you would end up here. Russell. She always said you were predictable in your greed. I ignored him and turned back to the desk in the center of the room. There was a single, leather-bound document sitting in the center, as if waiting for me. I opened it. It was the original incorporation papers of Hayes Construction. I scanned the pages until my eyes landed on a paragraph highlighted in yellow marker. Clause 44. The condition of gratitude. I read the legal jargon, and my knees gave out. The beneficiary, Russell Hayes, holds no equity. He holds a conditional proxy revocable instantly upon any act of gross ingratitude or public disrespect toward the grantor. I never owned it. I whispered, the realization crashing over me like ice water. I never owned a single share. I was just an employee. I turned the page, and a photograph slipped out. It fluttered to the floor. I picked it up. It was a Polaroid from 20 years ago. I was 10 years old, sitting on a bicycle, grinning at the camera. Eleanor stood next to me, looking young and fierce. In her hand, she was holding this exact leather binder. I stared at the image. She had signed this clause the day I turned 10. She had prepared for my betrayal before I had even hit puberty. She knew. She had looked at her son and seen the potential for cruelty, and she had built a shield to protect herself. Mom. I choked out. Hot tears blurred my vision. I collapsed into the dusty chair, clutching the photo. I had spent my life thinking she was weak, that she needed me to survive. But she had been carrying me. She had been carrying the weight of my ego, my mistakes, and my ingratitude for decades, waiting for the moment I would force her to drop me. I have to find her, I said, wiping my face with my sleeve. The panic was different now. It was not about the money anymore. It was the terrifying, hollow feeling of being a child left alone in a supermarket. I cannot be alone. My phone buzzed. The screen showed Bernard Doyle. I answered immediately. Bernard, tell me where she is. I know about the clause. I know everything. Then you know it is over. Russell. Bernard's voice was cold, devoid of the professional warmth he used to fake. I am calling to tell you to stop. The police have been notified that you are stalking a private citizen. I just want to talk to her. I screamed. She does not want to talk to you. Bernard replied. But she did leave you one thing. It is at the front desk of your former office. Go pick it up. What is it? I asked, my breath catching in my throat. Is it a check a chance no? Bernard said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in his tone. You are not going to like it. Russell. But it is the only inheritance you have earned. He hung up, leaving me standing in the dust of my mother's secret life, holding a picture of a boy who no longer existed. I walked into the glass-walled reception area of Doyle and Associates with the posture of a beaten dog. The receptionist, a young woman who used to rush to get my coffee whenever I visited, did not even look up from her screen. I walked straight to the back office where Bernard sat behind his massive mahogany desk. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock that seemed to be counting down the seconds of my remaining sanity. Bernard did not offer me a seat. He did not offer me a drink. He simply opened the top drawer of his desk and slid a thick, cream-coloured envelope across the polished wood. It was sealed with red wax, a dramatic flair that felt painfully like my mother. She wanted you to read this in private, Bernard said, his voice devoid of emotion. But I told her you would likely tear it up if you were alone. So, read it. I picked up the envelope. My name was written on the front in her elegant, looping script. My hands trembled so violently that I struggled to break the seal. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, the kind she had used for thank-you notes for 30 years. My son, I have forgiven you for the money you stole from the company accounts. I have forgiven you for the lies you told the investors. I even forgiven you for the times you forgot my birthday because you were too busy chasing status. A mother's capacity for forgiveness is vast. Russell. I thought it was infinite. But the night you stood up in that restaurant and humiliated me in front of Sophie, something inside of me finally broke. You looked at me with such genuine hatred. You looked at the woman who gave you life, and you saw nothing but an obstacle. I realized then that I was not helping you by cleaning up your messes. I was enabling a monster. I am not punishing you for being poor or for being a failure. I am punishing you for being cruel. I stopped reading, my chest heaving. The words were not angry. They were calm. They were the words of a judge delivering a final verdict. I forced my eyes back to the page for the final paragraph. There is one thing you need to know: I did not leave you. I just stopped destroying myself for you. Goodbye. Russell? No, I whispered, the paper crinkling in my grip. She cannot mean this. She loves me. She does love you, Bernard said quietly, closing a folder on his desk. That is why she left before she hated you. I stumbled out of the office, blinded by tears. I needed to hear a voice that was on my side. I needed Valerie. She was selfish. Yes. But we were partners. We were in this mess together. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. The number you have dialed is not accepting calls from this line. I froze on the sidewalk. I tried again. Same message. She had blocked me. I opened my social media apps, desperate to find her. Her status had already changed. Traveling to Paris with Mark. Mark was my former tennis partner. I sank onto a public bench, the cold metal biting through my thin suit trousers. I was 40 years old, and I was completely, utterly alone. The silence of the city was deafening. My phone buzzed one last time. It was Vance, the detective, Mr. Hayes, Vance said, and I could hear the defeat in his voice. I am refunding your deposit. I cannot track her. The trail ends at a bus station 300 miles north. She paid cash. No cameras, no witnesses. She scrubbed the footage. Russell. She erased herself. Keep looking, I begged, gripping the phone. I will pay you double, I will. With what money? Vance interrupted. Face it, kid. Your mother was never the weak old lady you thought she was. She was the shark, and you were just swimming in her tank. Let it go. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked at the busy street. People walked by, talking, laughing, living their lives. None of them knew that the man sitting on the bench had just lost the entire world because he forgot to say thank you. I realized then that my mother had not just hidden her assets. She had hidden her strength, and I had been fool enough to mistake her mercy for weakness. The morning air in the small coastal village of Stone Harbour tasted of salt and freedom. I stepped out of my rented cottage, a tiny, weathered structure with peeling blue paint that was barely the size of my old walk-in closet, for the first time in 40 years. I did not check my watch. I did not reach for a BlackBerry to check the Asian market opening numbers. I simply stood on the porch, wrapped in a thick knitted cardigan, and filled my lungs with the sharp, cold breeze coming off the Atlantic. I walked down the cobblestone street toward the local market. In Riverton, people looked at me to gauge my net worth or to judge the cut of my suit. Here. The fisherman simply nodded as he unloaded crates of silver herring. The baker smiled warmly as he handed me a loaf of sourdough bread, still warm from the oven. Good morning, Ellie, he said cheerfully. Good morning, Thomas, I replied, the name feeling strange but wonderful on my tongue. Here, I was not Mrs. Hayes, the iron-fisted matriarch. I was just Ellie, the quiet woman who liked dark roast coffee and paid in cash. I sat on a wooden bench overlooking the harbour and pulled out a burner phone, the only link I had left to my previous life. I dialed a single number. "It is done." Bernard's voice came through, sounding distant and tinny. "The transfer is irrevocable. Russell has stopped screaming, mostly because he has lost his voice. The board has appointed the interim management team you selected. You did well." "Bernard?" I said softly, watching a seagull dive into the grey water. "Thank you for everything. But do not call me on this number again. I want to live like a normal person now." "Understood," Bernard said. There was a pause, and his voice softened. "Be happy. Eleanor." I hung up and removed the battery from the phone, tossing the device into a public trash can. It clattered against the metal bottom, a final punctuation mark to a sentence that had lasted too long. I stopped at a small flower stall on my way back. The woman arranging hydrangeas looked up at me with bright, curious eyes. "You have been here for a week now," she noted with a friendly grin. "Are you just passing through a tourist, avoiding the city heat?" I touched the petals of a blue hydrangea, thinking of the chaos I had left behind: the screaming son, the greedy daughter-in-law, the empire built on sand. "No," I said, and my smile felt genuine for the first time in years. "I am not a tourist. I came here to live." Back in the cottage, I opened my suitcase. At the very bottom lay a small wooden sign, the one the real estate agent had hammered into the ground of the lakeside plot 20 years ago. It read, "Sold." I hung it on the wall above my small fireplace. To anyone else, it was just a piece of old wood. To me, it was a symbol of the price I had paid for my soul. I walked to the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back looked weary, her hair pulled back in the severe, tight bun that Russell always said made me look distinguished. I picked up a pair of kitchen scissors. Snip. A long lock of grey hair fell into the sink. Snip. Snip. I cut it all off. I cut away the severity. I cut away the expectations. When I was finished, my hair was short, framing my face in soft waves. I looked 10 years younger. I looked like a woman who had nothing to lose. Russell believed I had taken the money out of spite. He believed I was hoarding millions in some offshore paradise while he starved. He was wrong. I had not kept a dime for myself beyond what I needed for this simple cottage and food. The millions, the entire liquid value of the Hayes estate, had been transferred into an irrevocable trust for Sophie, my granddaughter. It was a blind trust. She would receive it when she turned 25, old enough to understand that money is a tool, not a personality. Russell would never touch it. I had saved the family fortune by keeping it away from the one person who would have burned it. I washed my face, feeling the cold water wake up my skin. I had lost a son. Yes. But I had saved a legacy. And more importantly, I had saved myself. I looked out the window at the endless horizon, where the sky met the sea in a line of perfect clarity. Eleanor Hayes had disappeared, and a new person had been born. I drove for 6 hours straight, fueled by nothing but stale coffee and a desperate, gnawing hope that I could still fix this. The detective had given me one final lead. A tip from a bus ticket vendor who remembered a woman matching my mother's description buying a ticket to a coastal village called Stone Harbour. When I finally pulled my car up to the small, weathered cottage with peeling blue paint, my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I ran to the door and pounded on the wood. Silence answered me. I pounded again, harder this time, shouting her name until my voice cracked. "She is gone. Son." A voice called out from the garden next door. I turned to see an elderly woman holding a watering can. She looked at me with pity. "Gone," I stammered, my hands shaking. "What do you mean gone?" "She lives here." "She did," the neighbour replied, shaking her head slowly. "She packed up yesterday morning. Said the ocean air was good for her soul, but it was time to move on. You missed her by 24 hours. She was a kind woman, very quiet, but she made it clear she did not want to be found." I sank onto the porch steps, the reality crashing down on me heavier than the tide. I was too late. I was always too late. I walked down to the edge of the harbour and sat on a rough wooden bench, staring out at the grey, churning water. The ocean was vast and indifferent, much like the future facing me now. She was not playing a game. She was not waiting for an apology. She was simply gone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the letter she had left with Bernard. The paper was soft now, worn from the 100 times I had unfolded it. I skipped to the very bottom, to the postscript I had been too angry to understand the first time. The handwriting was shaky there, as if she had written it while crying. "You told me I should go get a job. Russell." Well, I finally listened. This is the last job I will ever do in my life, saving myself. I dropped my head into my hands. The wind whipped my hair, but I felt numb. I had created this void. I had hollowed out my own life with greed and arrogance, and now I was sitting in the echo of it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a debt collector. Instead, it was a news alert from the Business Wire. Official press release: Hayes Construction appoints new external CEO following the complete restructuring of the board. Former executive Russell Hayes holds no remaining shares or authority. She had not just taken the company back. She had given it away to strangers rather than let me ruin it again. She had severed the last tie. The phone rang. "It was Bernard?" "I assume you saw the news," Bernard said. His voice was not mocking this time. It was solemn. Why, I choked out, tears finally spilling over my cheeks, hot and stinging. Why did she have to go this far? "Bernard, is she that angry? Eleanor wanted me to tell you something if you ever called crying." Bernard said softly. "She wanted you to know that this is not revenge. Russell, revenge is for enemies. This is for you. This is the only way you will ever learn how to be a human being again. You have to start from zero, just like she did." I don't know how. I whispered. "Then you better start learning," Bernard said, and the line went dead. For the first time in 40 years, I sat on a bench and wept. I cried not for the money, or the cars, or the house. I cried because I was a 40-year-old orphan who had thrown away the only person who ever loved him unconditionally, hundreds of miles away. A Greyhound bus rolled down a long stretch of highway, chasing the setting sun. Eleanor sat by the window, watching the golden light bathe the fields in a warm glow. She looked tired, but the tension that had lived in her shoulders for decades was gone. She adjusted the strap of her purse, which contained nothing but a few clothes, a book, and a picture of her granddaughter. She leaned her head against the cool glass, the vibration of the engine humming a lullaby of departure. "Freedom," she whispered to the empty seat beside her. "Freedom always has a price." She closed her eyes, a small, serene smile playing on her lips, and for the first time in a long time, she slept without dreaming of falling. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on whether Russell deserved his fate. Don't forget to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary. Smash that like button and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people. See you in the next video.